Let's talk college football and NFL. Mark, how's it going?
I'm doing just terrific, Greg. I hope you are too. And if you didn't enjoy last week's NFL football games, you don't have a pulse. That's the first thing I can say. College football, as we know, you continue your upset beat looking for these live dogs, and I'm anxious to see who you've got on tap this weekend.
Yeah, last week and we talked about it. Is that these upset picks are not always like, hey man, I know that team's going to beat that team. It's about trying to strategically uh, make money by putting an average amount of dollars on upsets in college football that you think, okay, there's a reason for it. We talked about it last week with Georgia Southern and Nebraska. The reason, especially since I picked Nebraska to win the division, as I said, and I was joking around about it, but it's the truth. It's hedging my bet. It's like, you know what? I picked them to win the division, but I'm not getting a good feeling already. And if somehow they lose this game, everything goes to crap, and I want to capitalize on that. So that was that, and I felt pretty good about it as well because I believe it was Jim Feist took it was one of his top picks for picking the points. I think they were a
Right.
23-point dog, and then we talked about Notre Dame. We talked about Notre Dame and Marshall about having them prepare for Ohio State for months, and then in a week after that, they have to play a team that they're a huge favorite. The head coach has never been in this spot before. And wow, I was really impressed with Marshall, though. Very impressed. They have a good football team, and they're doing it without their best offensive player, who's still out for personal reasons.
Okay, that's going to only bode well for the Thundering Herd down the road, especially when they gain this confidence with backup players. And to go into Notre Dame and upset the Irish is quite an accomplishment, to say the least. Now, inside this week's Playbook Football newsletter, that spin-off of that particular game happens to be our awesome angle of the week. And just quickly for our viewers out there, it basically involves fading teams who upset Notre Dame in their next football game. There's an anti-Irish letdown.
Oh,
So we'll see whether or not Marshall can get back up, stay back up when they host Bowling Green.
oh, Bowling
Yeah,
Green.
Bowling.
Okay,
There you go. You're kind of a team, huh?
yeah. Now I'll throw a couple of bucks on the money line. Why not?
There you go. There you go.
Okay, wasn't gonna do it, but now I will. Remember when we did our Sun Belt preseason preview, and we talked about how good the East was. That it was just there were teams that the last place team in the East could be a contender for the West crown, and sure enough, that last place team was Georgia Southern. And you see, you got Georgia Southern, Old Dominion upsetting Virginia Tech a couple weeks ago. We know what Georgia State can do. They had two really close losses to Power Five schools. We know Coastal Carolina can do. They're going to have a first round draft pick at quarterback. Marshall's got the win over Notre Dame. App State's got the win over Texas A&M, and then you got this James Madison team that looks like they're going to be extremely dangerous. So that is an impressive division and of all conferences, the Sun Belt. That is a rising conference, and it has been for the last few years, and it's just getting better.
Well, they caught the attention of a lot of college football fans last week, Greg. The Sun Belt did when, they went in and they took what they call paycheck games, where they'll sign up and they'll go up against a Power Five bully, haul down $1 million or two for the paycheck. You didn't get out and say thank you. Well, three of them last week went into those Power Five conferences and pulled the upsets.
Yeah.
So they left with over $4 million. Those three football teams did,
Thank you.
and with wins on top of it. That was
Yeah.
quite a week for the Sun Belt Conference, to say the least.
Yes. And the other two upsets that really caught our eye was Washington State. And remember, again, we talked about this in the preseason. You got to watch these preseason shows, everybody. We talked about Washington State being an interesting sleeper in the Pac 12. Keep an eye on Washington State. And sure enough, now they were actually one of my top picks last week based on the point spread and all the trends. And I'm sure based on those trends, you had them as well. But winning the game outright, very impressive. And you have to really look at this coach now, Dickert, who did a great job with the defense last year as their coordinator and goes into Wisconsin and gets the outright win. And remember, we talked about Wisconsin being potentially a lame duck favorite for the Big Ten championship, and I think there's proof right there. I don't know. Maybe there needs to be a change of scenery at the top at Wisconsin, and it could be the defensive coordinator.
Well, I'm going to say Lee Corso's favorite phrase, not so fast, my friend, okay? And it's basically this, is if you looked inside the yardage and the stats in that upset
Sure,
win for Washington State last week, Wisconsin dominated the football game. They
sure.
won by over 140 yards in the stats. So that will end up ultimately coming back to probably bite Washington State. And I think it'll also serve well for Wisconsin, knowing that they just outmuscled that football team and lost the game. It's in Paul Chryst DNA to lose football games like that. Once a year or so, he lays a big monster egg. He did that last week. And you mentioned about winning the West Division in the Big Ten Conference. It's almost by default because there really is no competition, and that's a much, much weaker division. So I'm going to look for Wisconsin to battle back here out of the ugliness, that big black eye they got last week, and bounce back and be a much better football team moving forward.
Yeah, remember, not next week they're at Ohio State,
Yes.
so they could be 2-2. It probably will be 2-2. It'd be pretty miraculous if they could pull that upset. But part of the reason too is, and you look at the rest of their schedule, they have some really uh, marginally tough road games, and to now be in a position where you pretty much got to run. Well, again, they're not a championship team anyway, but the fact is that whole division, I think, is just going to be. I think these teams are going to be beating each other up. You got Minnesota, you got Northwestern now better than people thought. Again, I think Illinois is better than people thought. And I just think it's going to be a lot of fun. And who knows about Nebraska now? Because the coaching change, what does that do? Does that push them over the top and now they win a close game against Oklahoma? Or will they get slaughtered against Oklahoma and it's like, well, maybe Scott Frost wasn't so bad? I don't know. I think it's up in the air. I really do. I think this is going to be a very entertaining and flip of the coin type of game on Saturday, big noon kickoff with Nebraska and Oklahoma.
Well, you bring out a great point about that teams in the Big Ten West beating up on one another. It's similar, but not quite like the Southeast Conference West Division, where a lot of those teams beat up on one another because they're all good teams. They beat up on one another in the Big West and the Big Ten because they're not good teams, they're
Yeah.
mediocre teams. So, there's a difference, I guess, in that analogy, but nonetheless, I see that happening this year as well with the Big Ten West teams beating up on one another and obviously making their win-loss record not that attractive come the end of the season when those bowl bids go
And by
out.
the way, I don't think I'd be surprised if Washington State has any of that coming back to them this week, though. Boy, does Colorado State look bad. I know Norval's going to right the ship, and you need some time. But they lose to Middle Tennessee State, who got destroyed by James Madison. You can go through that whole thing, but kind of knew, it's coaching changes, and even though we brought a lot of players over from Nevada, you knew it's going to take some time.
Well, I'm going to file that game four that happened last week for Washington State in the what goes up must come down category the following week. And they'll probably most likely play down to the level of opposition. But as you say, the opposition they're playing isn't very much this week.
Yeah, and things are going to start cooking in the Pac-12 really soon, starting next week. So there's some and it's nice to have these non-conference games because it's different. But starting next week, really, we're going to start seeing in the next couple of weeks we get into conference play. Matter of fact, Washington State starts with Oregon at home. That's when we'll find out about Washington State for real, and so forth and so on. And how about Kansas? Kansas, I know you liked them last week. They pull off the upset over West Virginia, and I'm taking them this week as one of my top plays. Look, we have talked about Lance Leipold now for about 3 years. And we figured it would take him a year last year with Kansas, and yet he still comes out there and pulls off a huge upset against Texas. So gets something to get these guys believing in the system. And then they come out and put it to West Virginia. It was an exciting football game. It could have gone either way, but that's just great to see that he is going to turn around Kansas, and I hope he stays there long enough for those fans to enjoy it because they deserve it. They have been so bad for so long, and you know what? Maybe that's a place if Kansas. I know it's a basketball school, But if they've got the money, and I don't know if they do or not, but if they've got the money, it'd be nice if they can maybe develop the way Bill Snyder did Kansas State. Can they keep Lance Leipold at Kansas long term?
Well, they're going to have to keep Lance Leipold at Kansas long term if they have any hopes at all of becoming a respectable college football team. It's sort of like the state of Kansas clicked their heels, made two wishes, and they got them. One was Lance Leipold to revive this Kansas football program, and a couple of years ago, it was Chris Kleiman at Kansas State who's going to be doing just the same thing. So these two football programs in Kansas and Kansas State are being led right now by very, very underrated football head coaches, and they're going to be making a lot of noise down the road, especially this football
I mean, I
season.
can't. I was looking at my 5 stars this week, and I had Kansas State and Kansas as part of my 2 5 stars this week.
There you go.
Wow, that's crazy. But hey, why not? All right. Now, before we get into the games, we got to talk about some quarterback key injuries. Maybe the biggest one of all is Notre Dame. And it's not that the kid looked like he was going to be a superstar, but look, he's the starter. He's got talent, and worst case scenario, especially after a couple of losses, you want to develop him. But now you can't develop him, and you bring in the backup. We'll find out what kind of. I think he's a 4-star, so he's got talent. So we'll find out how much talent he has. And they play Cal, and that's a really good test for a young quarterback because we know how good of a defensive coordinator Justin Wilcox is. And I actually like Cal in that game and the points and would actually throw a couple of bucks on the upset. Until Notre Dame can kind of prove who they are as far as W's, why not? But that's a interesting and maybe a really tough loss for the Irish.
Well, there's a great dynamic inside the football game, Greg, and it's largely about what Notre Dame did not do last week. They were favored by 20 or more points, and teams like that who come back and lose the game and come back the next game as double-digit favorites lay another
Oh,
egg. They tend to do just that. They stay in the weeds the next week. Now, what you've also got, looking inside this game a lot deeper, I love to go inside the stats. We're a little early in the year, but we can still do this week. If you look at California, they've outyarded both of their opponents this year. Notre Dame has been outgained in all of their football games this year. So you have one football team that's playing really well on the field, pushing their opponents around, the other one being pushed around. And you're talking about the double-digit dog being that team that's playing well right now. I'm with you. I'm the Cal Bears in this
and by the
game.
way, I'm going to have an interview later today because we're recording this on Thursday, and we will be recording all of these shows on Thursday. And by the way, if you ever have any questions or comments, especially for Mark regarding games for the following week, let us know. Put it in the comment sections because you got been interested in what's going to go on next week. Let us know. Put it in the comment section of this week's show, and we will talk about it on next week's show. So keep that in mind. And again, that interview is coming up a little bit later on today, on Thursday. I am going to speak with our Notre Dame analyst and talk a little bit about what's going on there with the quarterback position. So keep that in mind. Texas, what a tough. I mean, if I'm one of those fans, I'm going, of course. See, I'm a Jet fan, so I know how you can react to things like this. Of course, we finally found a nice quarterback, a little 5-star kid in the transfer portal. He's off to a good start. We're off to a good start, and then he gets hurt. And maybe you were even thinking, well, we were going to lose this game by 20 anyway. And then lo and behold, you lose the game on a last-second field goal, and you got to be sitting there going, man, if we just had our quarterback healthy. And he's not. So he's going to be lost for a little bit. And we'll find out how much that hurts Texas because they're playing Texas San Antonio this week. And this kid's okay, but he's like one of those typical backups. He looks like a guy that don't turn the ball over, don't make any mistakes, but he's not going to help you win football games.
Well, I think you've got a great setting in this football contest here. A couple of things, Greg. Number one, you got Texas in a monumental letdown. They had A&M pinned to the wire. They were looking like they're ready to pop the champagne in the locker room right after the game, and they get nipped at the wire in that football contest. I think that's devastating for the football program. I'm sorry, I just said A&M. I meant
Sure.
Alabama. That's devastating for a football program to have to get back up in a game immediately thereafter. Then you lose your top quarterback, a 5-star prospect. That's going to be very, very unhealthy for this football program. Now you bring in Texas San Antonio, who is simply the toughest red-headed stepchild in the state of
Yeah.
Texas. My goodness, this Jeff Traylor is doing a masterful job. He will be, we've said this before, he will be at a Power Five conference next football season. And you can lock it in, especially if he beats Texas this particular
Sure.
week. You know, this is the game of the year for the Roadrunners from UTSA San Antonio, and I've got to grab the points with them in this
Yeah,
game.
definitely going to be interesting to find out where he could land. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. Yeah, I was a little bit torn because the spread kind of been fluctuating between 11 and 13. And it's like, yeah, man, they are respecting the hell out of the Roadrunners. I love it. But yeah, it's such a low spread, and Texas impressed the hell out of you. How could you not be impressed with the way Texas looked last week? So that's why I'm a little bit, it was one of those games where we all know Texas has more talent. There's no question about that. But Texas San Antonio has a better quarterback. So
There's another aspect of the football game, Greg, and it goes real well in football handicapping. It's basically the letdown factor, where when you win a big game, you tend to let down the next game. There's also the aspect of when you lose a close call football game that you should have won, and you tend to let down as well, and that applies in this
yep.
football game
And we
as
talked about
well.
it, even though it wasn't down to the wire, but that's what we talked about with Notre Dame last week. Is that the
Exactly. Right.
letdown of Ohio State, a big game, especially months to prepare and all that, and you saw the results. Okay, so, and one last injury to keep an eye on at quarterback, and it's Pittsburgh, because they have two injuries, their starter and their backup. So Slovis went down, the backup came in, they still almost found a way, and the fact that I had Tennessee in that game, it was driving me nuts. I'm like, come on, you can't beat this team with this guy, because the backup wasn't even that great. He's like throwing these weird passes, and it's like, oh no, so I'm going to lose one of these games to one of these weird backup quarterbacks. But he was banged up. Probably shouldn't have even played the rest of the game, but did. So we gutted it out. So now nobody knows. Again, now I'm still sticking with Pitt. I believe they're going to find a way to play one of these two guys, which is why I decided to take Pitt this week and give the 10. And I also throw in the revenge factor. I mean, that's big. If they didn't lose to West Virginia last year, I would stay away from the game. But they've got to be a little bit ramped up, even though they lost a tough one, not a game they wanted to lose. But they beat Tennessee last year, so it wasn't like they were in a revenge factor. So I can see this being a game that they kind of circled when they were looking at their schedule this year. Not a power team, I get it, but still a revenge game.
Well, and a letdown situation for Pitt here, not only the quarterbacks, but their scheduling so far to date. This could also be that's playing down to the level of opposition type of a football
Well,
game.
hopefully the
I
revenge
know,
erases that. That's the hope.
yes, exactly. I notice you have on your additional picks list, not your top plays list, and I'm glad they're not on your top
No,
plays
I
list.
wouldn't do
You've
that.
done real well with those, and yeah, so if you're going to use them, you might tuck them into that additional picks list for
Yeah.
sure.
All right. Now let's get in. We talked a little bit about Oklahoma, Nebraska, so let's go right to it. And again, this is going to be one of my three double-digit upsets of the week. And why not? When you're just taking a look at how Nebraska even loses football games, that they're always there down to the wire. So why wouldn't I roll the dice on a money line? Maybe they get a break this week. Maybe the ball bounces one way or another. Venables has never been a head coach on the road before. We don't care about what happened the first 2 weeks because those were games they should have beaten up teams, Oklahoma. And to tell you the truth, I mean, nobody really knows what to expect from Oklahoma because there was a lot of key players that left and moved over to USC. They still have a good quarterback. I get that. They've got the offensive coordinator quarterback connection, so I don't think that's going to be an issue. There's talent on offense. There always is at Oklahoma, and there still is, no matter how many guys Riley brought with him. And they're better defensively for it because of Venables. And I know Nebraska, and I'll tell you this. I talked to Steve Marek, who covers Nebraska for Rivals, yesterday about the whole Scott Frost thing. And he kind of felt, I know you guys were talking yesterday on the show about, I think Victor had this as an under, I believe, because he does a lot of totals. You and
Yes.
I stay away from totals, but he does totals. And it was interesting because Steve actually felt the opposite. He was like, he doesn't see how Nebraska is going to stop Oklahoma any way, shape, or form. He thinks the defense has just been really bad so far. A lot of it has to do with the defensive line. They lost a lot of leaders up front, and it's showing on the football field because they expected to be a little bit better than this. But it's a game that he also said that he could tell that it's almost like a weight's been lifted, that there's so much excitement already regarding the fact that not that they are happy that Frost is gone and he it's just a feeling of maybe this is what we needed to jumpstart the program. And you know how emotion can dictate a football game like this, especially last year when Nebraska almost beat Oklahoma in Norman.
Well, I listened to that interview, and it was a great interview. He was very, very impressive to me that you interviewed from Nebraska. The thing I took away from it, and I guess it's like everything in life, you can take away from whatever it is that you wish to want to take away from. Okay, yes, he thought that they might get crushed in the football game, but he also brought out some great points. Number one, their head coach, Mickey Joseph, and how geeked up they are to be playing under him. He's extremely well
Yep.
liked on this football team here. He's an interim coach, the first black head coach in Nebraska athletics history. So there's a lot revolving around him in this football game here as well. And I love the fact that while Scott Frost was shown the exit sign, given the pink slip, the last 13 losses in a row by Nebraska have all been by single
Yep.
digit margins. That plays right into this point spread in this particular football game. I'll apply the Mickey Joseph
Yeah.
factor in here as well. And I'm going to be so stunned if they don't end up on your winning the game straight up list by the end of the show.
Oh, well, obviously they are. I mean, they're plus 340. So they're in one of those top three double digit outright upset. You know, I was actually thinking because my point system has 300 points for my 5-star, and it's the same pretty much if I take the upset. So why not just take the points? But when I do that, I also think of, well, you got to invest 300 compared to 100. But the other thing is that I would feel confident because, like you said, why not also, if you want to put all your chips in and maybe even double your chips than normal to go in on taking those 11 points, why wouldn't you, considering, as you said, they've lost 13 straight games by single digit numbers? So I
Yep.
think you're good either way. And by the way, Nebraska's lost 18 straight games, top 25 opponents. They got to break that streak sooner or later. All right, Miami, Texas A&M, and we talked App State just a second about their upset over, and I didn't think they could pull this off. I thought that after the North Carolina game, it was going to take a little bit out of them, and expecting too much to go on the road at A&M and then rebound and so forth. But I think really what it shows you, first of all, now that we're talking about A&M, is that they still have some issues, especially at quarterback. I mean, I know this kid's got all sorts of talent, and he's supposed to be some sort of, big time recruit. And how many times have we seen this? And when you are a big program like A&M, see, like for me, Fisher's supposedly does such a great job recruiting. He would have been better off like Michigan. Like, let me have a Cade McNamara in there for a year or two to get this big 5-star recruit ready. But he apparently, I guess, doesn't have that guy. He had a pretty good backup he's decided to go and jump over for this kid. And now you're in a situation where you're writing everything on a very young quarterback. So maybe he breaks out. Maybe his big game is Miami on Saturday. But until he has that game and shows me that he can be the guy that they expect him to be, I got Tyler Van Dyke on the other side. I'm taking him.
Well, I think there's a major fleecing going on these days in college football, and it happens to be taking place at College Station, where Jimbo Fisher is just absolutely sucking this football program dry with the paychecks that he's collecting.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. He's all name and show and no dough. We haven't seen anything from A&M. We've seen some promise, yes, we have, but they haven't delivered the goods. All you read about is the recruiting classes that he's having, and all he ends up doing is laying eggs like he did last week in a football game just like this. It's interesting. It kind of blew my mind. But at this stage of his career with Texas A&M, and I believe it's 45 games he's coached so far, give or take a game or two. I came across a stat that kind of blew my mind that when Kevin Sumlin was the head coach at Texas A&M and had been their head coach over the same identical amount of games, he had won more games there than Jimbo Fisher has so far. And Jimbo Fisher's hauling down this $10 million a year contract. It's my
Yeah.
goodness, what's going
Well,
on
they got
there,
off to remember that was the Johnny Manziel era. There was all sorts of excitement at Texas A&M about winning a national championship, and it all just went away like that. And part of it that went away, let's recall, was the whole Kyler Murray situation. I mean,
Yep.
that really doomed that would doom the program. The fact that they couldn't keep him there, and instead he goes on and wins a Heisman somewhere else. So anyway, I'll let you continue.
Well, it's a big test for here for Miami of Florida, unquestionably. Mario Cristobal, Tyler Van Dyke has really gotten off to a slow start. Van Dyke has. The Canes have showed well here so far. This is going to be a big gauge game for me. I'm going to gauge what Texas A&M is all about, and it will gauge what Miami of Florida is all about. Because of that, I'm going to take a seat on the sidelines in this football game, but you will not find me laying Jimbo Fisher as a favorite anytime soon.
Yeah, the thing that to keep an eye on with A&M, and when you have a quarterback like King, who's got all this talent, he has to be able to get the ball in the hands of the weapons. They have that's the advantage A&M has. One of the big ones is they've got two guys that can score anytime they touch the ball. They've got the running back, a chain, and the receiver, Anaya Smith. And anytime those guys get their hands on the ball, they can go the distance, and that can give you those cheap scores, which you can use. Um, but again, when you have Tyler Van Dyke on the sideline, a guy that is right now, his projection is first round NFL talent if he keeps going the way that he's going. He's got that prototypical old school pocket passer, arm size kind of deal going for him, which is very attractive, even though he doesn't have the mobility everybody's looking for. But let's recall last year, he went on the road and upset Pitt last year. I think the Pitt game, I don't know if that was home. I think it was on the road. Yeah, upset Pitt on the road, upset North Carolina State at home. So he's had the big stage, not as big as this, but he's had the big stage prime time games, and he's won them. So it's not going to be new to Van Dyke. But also Miami 6-3 against the spread their last 9 as a road dog. So that's going to be an upset for me, not a double-digit upset, but definitely a game where I'll take whatever it is, 5 or 6 points.
One other interesting aspect in the football game, and we called this out in our weekly newsletter this week, is the fact that that loss was so bad by E&M last week that they fell from number 6 in the AP poll to number 24.
Wow.
Yes, that ties all time the biggest fall, biggest drop in a poll from one week to the
Wow.
next. So you know that the
No
whole
respect.
world's onto him right
Yeah.
now. So we'll see whether or not that serves well for Texas A&M or not, or maybe they'll be exposed as being the fraud that I think they are. But we'll find out come Saturday
Oh,
night.
and here's one backup quarterback I don't want to see because look, I like this kid, and I don't know if as soon as he loses the job, I would have left, and that's Max Johnson. I don't want to see him on the field because I think he's better, and I don't want to see him since I'm taking Miami. That's the worst thing
I,
I think for Miami is if after a series or two he just goes, all right, let's bring in Max Johnson, and Max Johnson throws for 350 yards or something and 3 touchdowns, and takes the job the rest of the year. Okay, BYU Oregon. God, and now we get to the really big games, including the one we just talked about, BYU Oregon, and yeah, it's West Coast, and nobody's really going to be on top of this like Miami and A&M. But as diehard football fans, college football fans as we are, we know how big this game is. BYU, we've been saying it for weeks now. We know how talented they are. We know how much experience they are. They had the big win over Baylor in overtime last week, and they did it really with defense. And there are some injuries that you need to keep an eye on with BYU. They have their top 2 wide receivers did not even play last week, and they have been banged up all season. Romney hasn't played all season, and the other kid, I think it's Nakua. I think he played like a half against South Florida, had like 2 touchdowns, and he's been injured now since. So as of yesterday, I believe, I didn't see an update yet on whether or not those kids would play, but just keep an eye on that because those are big difference makers for Hall, the quarterback, and BYU's offense, and that's going to be tough to try to beat Oregon on the road without him. But I'm still taking BYU because I just think BYU right now is a better football team than Oregon. And I know Oregon played Georgia, so it's one kind of side of the spectrum to the other. You play Georgia and you play some bad FCS team, so we don't know what Oregon is yet. We really don't. But I just, I think you feel the same way. I mean, this is a BYU team that if they can beat Oregon, they're going to prove to everybody they are for real. And I don't know where they're ranked, but if they beat Oregon, they better be ranked in the top 10.
well, you got a couple of things here that Brigham Young's got big hurdles to get over here. Number one, Oregon's beat 29 consecutive non-conference opponents in a row.
At home.
They're
Yep.
all Yes, and they're also riding a 20-game home win
Yeah.
streak.
Yeah.
So, those are two pretty big hurdles for a team like BYU to have to get over here. The third thing is inside of our weekly newsletter, we have a feature we call the Smart Box. It's a handicapping tidbit, and it's basically having to do with teams that are playing in game number 3 of the football season, as BYU is here. They're locked in this Smart Box in a real bad situation this particular week here. I'm going to lean to Oregon in the football contest here. BYU's been very, very good to us all season long so far, and I anticipate using them down the road. But this is going to be a very, very difficult get-up game for BYU, and I think Oregon will hold serve at home in this contest.
Now, I've got a couple of trends that are working my way. I got them right here. You know this
Yes, I
magazine.
do. I see it. I
So
recognize
I
it.
got there. And I've got BYU has covered 10 straight as dogs of 6 or less following a straight up win. And Oregon has dropped 7 straight covers at home off a straight up non conference win. So both of those side towards BYU there. And let's a couple other things. Just remember what they did last year. And again, we talked about it on the preseason show. They played the Pac-12 5 times. They beat the Pac-12 5 times. They also beat the Pac-12 eventual champions, Utah. So that's impressive. By the way, the win against Baylor last week was BYU's first win versus a top 10 team at home since
Wow.
1990,
Wow.
when eventual Heisman Trophy winner Ty Detmer was quartering the team, and they beat top-ranked Miami. You probably
Wow.
remember
Okay.
that game, or at least
Uh,
I remember like fogs of it, but it was such a big game that you do have memories of that. Those were some glorious times for BYU fans. I was like the
well,
Steve Young, Detmer, Young, all that kind of stuff.
well, at my age, Greg, going back on football scores in the 1990s, a lot of fog
Yeah,
exists in
pretty
games.
much. In general,
I remember,
yeah.
I remember Ty Detmer, BYU, and a lot about Miami, but I do recall the football game. Yes, I
Penn
do.
State Auburn. We saw it last year. We're going to see it again this year at Happy Valley. Penn State's a 3-point favorite, and this is one of my BYU and Penn State are two games I really like this week. Um, Maybe Auburn comes out. We weren't showing anybody anything, but I just don't believe that. I just they just their offense again looks just so bad. They can't. How can Auburn not find a quarterback? I mean, they don't have, I mean, this TJ Finley, I give him credit for losing like 60 pounds because he was no exaggeration. He was playing at like 250, 260 last year. So he actually is down to about 215, I believe. And I had talked to Brian Matthews, who covers Auburn in the preseason, and he warned me about that. And I looked at it. I didn't even realize who it was because I was watching him, and I'm like, oh, who's this crappy quarterback? And I was like, oh, that's Finley? I couldn't even believe the size difference.
Yep.
But anyway, he's still not very good, even though he's lost the weight. And I rode Penn State last year, and then they had the big collapse, which started from Clifford getting hurt at Iowa. I had Penn State against Purdue week 1, so I'm going to ride them again this year until or if something happens. Remember we talked in the preseason about the 5-star running back? He broke out
Yes.
last week. That gives them finally a running game that they haven't had in a long time. So I just think Penn State is equally as good on defense, and at least they have some offensive weapons. So I'm taking Penn State.
Well, I'm an anti-James Franklin fan. Uh, from the moment I wake up until the moment I go
And
to
I've
bed.
seen the trends why.
Yes, okay. They speak for
Yes.
themselves. In this particular football game, I just alluded to the smart box, and basically what the smart box is this week is playing against teams that open up the season 2-0 straight up and against the spread, and they take to the road in game 3. They really, really struggle in contests like this, especially when they find themselves favored, as Penn State does. The other side of the coin is I write a weekly column in the Playbook newsletter. It's called my Bet You Didn't Know column, and it comes from systems articles that I write inside of a publication called the Black Book. And the Black Book basically takes the music theme and ties it into handicapping football games. The music theme was big Tom Petty fan. Don't do me like that. And what it is an insult for college football home dogs that were bowl teams last year that are undefeated, taking points from a fellow undefeated football team, especially if the opponent they're playing as defense is not that good, a mediocre or bad defense. This is the role Auburn finds themselves in this week. I see this being a huge game for Brian Harsin here. He will immediately cut all the chirping
Yep.
about his job being at stake at Auburn. If he wins the game, if he loses, he's back on the hottest of hot seats again here. This is a huge, huge football game for Harsin here. Going down into Auburn to have to play this football contest here. I like the upend Penn State.
A few things, and look, here's James Franklin's numbers. He is 4-18 straight up, 5-15-2 against the spread on the road versus teams with a greater than 666 winning percentage.
Yes.
Um, but then again, I also have you seen this magazine before?
I've seen that. Yeah, I think I've seen
Seen
that
that.
before. Yes.
So I found a few things in here. Uh, Penn State has covered 13 straight off back-to-back straight-up ATS wins. And Auburn is 1-7 against the spread in their last 8 with revenge versus a non-conference team. So sometimes you look at revenge, you would think it helps, but for Auburn, I guess it doesn't. But yeah, Brian Harsin really needs the win, even though you know how Auburn is. If they lose the next week, it'll all be over, and he'll be back to being on the hot seat.
That's a James Franklin factor in the football game that I'm a little bit concerned about, and you hit on it with 13 straight wins. Is when his team is on a roll, they pretty much stay on a roll.
Which is
And
what I said at the Open. Yes, I'm going to stick with them
exactly
until they lose.
until they bust.
So,
But we're only into game number
yes,
3 here,
it's
so
early.
I'm not going to call that a
Not
roll.
yet.
I'm going to say
No.
that they're beginning to begin some inertia
Yeah.
here. We'll see whether or not it continues or not.
And then sticking in the Big Ten, non-conference, Michigan State, Washington. You don't get to see this matchup very often, so it's nice. But look, this is a mystery game for Washington and fans. We really don't know what to expect. They got the Boers out there, and we got a feeling that he's going to do a good job. He's a good coach. He did a really nice job bringing in Penix from Indiana. We know what Penix can do. And so far, he's off to a good start. Remember, he was 11-3 for Indiana between
Wow.
19
Yep.
and 20 seasons. That's very impressive because even though, I mean, all you got to do is to take a look at how Indiana looked last year without him. And I don't care that they're 2-0. Look between the numbers because they're not very good. Again, Indiana. So that's how big Penix was. And now he's with Washington. He's off to a nice start. It's to me, I think it's going to be Washington's defensive line against Michigan State's offensive line because there's only, I believe, 2 starters back on Michigan State's offensive line from last year. And Washington has a couple of guys up front. I believe they're Polynesian, but, the guys basically, they're very hard to pronounce their names. But really 2 talented kids up front. And that's going to be, I think, where this game could be decided. Keep an eye on the fact that the left tackle, Jackson Kirkland, back for another season at left tackle for Washington, has an ankle injury, so that could be an issue for Washington. The thing that really does it, the reason I'm taking Michigan State in this one, is that if you look at it last year and really since Tucker's taken over in 2 years, they've had 6 overall underdog straight up wins. I had him last year at Miami. I had him a few other times. So he's done well by me. And I've got that nice little road feeling when I put money on Michigan State, they come through. So that's why I'm sticking with them in this one.
Well, I can understand that. It's sort of like riding that James Franklin freight train. Once he gets going, you're riding Michigan State, and they've been good to you as well. My biggest concern here is that I think this is a different Washington football team, and it all starts with, as you mentioned, Michael Penix Jr., the quarterback here. As long as he's playing well, this football team is very, very dangerous. You've also got a Michigan State, a team here that has struggled mightily against the Pac-12. 0-8 to the money, their last 8 Pac-12 football games coming into the contest here. Then you put Washington in their role when they're a non-conference single-digit home favorite. They've been very, very well. Also, the smart box comes into play here. Michigan State starts out 2-0. They're on the road. That's a fade. Put it all together. I'm on the Washington Huskies.
And lastly, Fresno State and USC, another game out west, and another one of those games that you're probably not paying too much attention to unless you're a diehard like we are. But this is just going to be a real, I think, entertaining and exciting game to watch, just like the one we watched last week against Oregon State. And as much as an Oregon State guy I am now with Jonathan Smith, and they came through week one, blowing out Boise. I couldn't take them last week because they hadn't shown anything on the road, but they came through with one opportunity, and I thought it was a gutsy right call by Jonathan Smith to go for it. He had one chance and he got it. They had basically they did the wildcat with the backup quarterback running it in. But that was an exciting game. Fresno State really came that close to beating Oregon State. We know they're very talented because of Hainer at quarterback. Mims at running back is an NFL running back. Tedford is an excellent coach. He's back there. And I think he's going to be such a great help for Hainer becoming an even better NFL head quarterback. And then you take a look at the numbers. We talked about BYU. Fresno State has covered 6 straight versus opponents off back-to-back straight-up wins. And I also like the fact that if you just look at the Pac-12, they are 3-4 straight up, 6-1 against the spread in the last 7. That includes the game last week. That was the loss, but that's how close they came to going 7-0 against the spread. They had a 7-point road loss at Oregon last year as an 18-point dog, and they had a 3-point road win at UCLA as an 18-point road dog. So they know how to go on the West Coast, or they are on the West Coast, but they know how to go to Pac-12 on the road and compete. And I think that's what we're going to get. I don't know if they win the game. They're not one of my upsets. I probably will throw a couple bucks on a money line, maybe just in case. But I do like the 12 points.
Well, I have to like the 12 points here as well. You have to like a team that's won the money 9 of the last 10 times. They've been a double-digit underdog. I think they're a very well-coached football team, and they put a knife in my heart, a dagger in my heart last week when they lost the play in the final play
Oh,
of the
did you have them
game.
last week?
Oh, yes,
Okay.
we did.
Oh, and
And
again, it was probably because Oregon State couldn't beat anybody on the road. Part of that.
well, part
Yeah.
of that, but it was a good decision by Oregon State. Hey, you're on the road, you play for the win.
Yes.
And he could have played for the tie going to overtime, and who knows what happens. But he did what he had to do, and he got the job done. It still didn't take away from the fact that Fresno State is a very good
Yes.
football team.
Yes.
And you could catch Southern Cal playing down to their level here. And if they do, that could be a big, big mistake here. You've got a head coach in, I believe it's Jeff Tedford, who does a terrific job, especially against the spread. And you're giving him double digits in a football game. I think this is a great spot for them to go in and scare the daylights out of Southern Cal.
And these two teams have played, they played recently. And matter of fact, USC has dominated Mountain West Conference foes. But the last 12, they're just 6-6 against the spread. They've won all 12. Matter of fact, they've only lost one game to current Mountain West Conference teams, but this could be another one. USC 4-1 straight up, but 2-3 against the spread last 5 versus Fresno. Anytime you watch USC now, though, you got Lincoln Riley, you got Caleb Williams, and you have Jordan Addison, and that's tune-in TV. And it's unfortunate that there are some games that people are going to miss because it's late night West Coast, but that should be a very exciting football.
I think it will be. I think this is going to be a marquee game. I know it's West Coast again, and a lot of people aren't going to see it. They're going to have to tune in for the score the next morning here, but this is worth staying up for to watch because if our analogy is correct, you might also be cashing your straight up ticket.
Right, those late night games are always intriguing because you could play something that lands on the last game of the day, or maybe you start a parlay on a money line with something like maybe you have like a 5-star NFL team and you go, you know what, maybe I'll try to put a little bit of money on the money line for Fresno with my 5-star NFL team, so if Fresno wins, I don't have to spend any money on that 5-star. So,
well, you know what you do in those late night parlays, Greg, is basically when you build your ticket up with everything you like up front in advance of it, you generally play a chalk in the late game, the favorite. And the reason you do that is because if you are correct, you can then come back and buy the dog in the game, and you can win the football game 2 ways. You can sweep, and cash your parlay, or that they could lose and the dog will cash on the money line or on the
yep.
dog line. So that's something to keep in mind if you're doing late night parlays. Keep your back end open to a favorite that you can end up bouncing back the other way with and taking the points.
Okay, and then finally, before we move on to the NFL, I'll ask you this every week. So I have my double-digit upsets this week. So last week there were 4, and we hit 3. That's not going to happen very often. Trust me, it's very difficult to do. But this week got 4 again, and we have one big one, just like last week with Georgia Southern cashing the ticket. We have Nevada against Iowa getting 13-1. We also have Nebraska, Georgia Southern, and Kansas. Mentioned Kansas. I'm going back to Georgia Southern, by the way. Why not? I know, yeah, maybe they have a letdown, but get rid of the letdown stuff. I'm still shaky with UAB without Bill Clark because they look like the old UAB without Bill Clark. So I still think Georgia Southern is matter of fact, I think Georgia Southern might be better than UAB. So maybe they'll let down, but if they're not, why am I not taking plus 330 on the money line? So anyway, those are my games. I get the feeling you're going to take Kansas.
Well, I would look at them for sure in a football game like this because that Lance Leipold train is up and revving and rolling
Yeah.
right now, and wife's up in front of it. I would do just that.
Okay, there you go. All right, now, by the way, at some point during the show, might have happened already, could be coming up a little bit later on, and actually, it could be happening right now. But I'm going to have a report. There's a whole lot of data that, as Mark knows, well aware. There's a whole bunch of information. Mark has the newsletter, and there's only so many things you can put in there, and there's just some things you just can't. And I think about the show. I mean, I can't put 80% of the stuff that otherwise we'd be talking for 10 hours. So there's a lot of information that we can't talk about, but I will put together in a very quick kind of summation report each week during these shows. And that'll give you a little bit of an opportunity to kind of get up to date on what's going on with all the other games that we don't have time to talk about, injury updates, trends, and all that other stuff. So this is the part of the show where I fill in the gaps. There is just way too much information for us to talk about on the show with Mark and yours truly. So we put together this little segment that we're going to implement into the show every week. I'm going to try to talk as fast as I can and go over all of the games and all of the information and player updates and injuries and all the kind of trends, obviously, and picks that we just didn't have time to talk about on our show. In the meantime, I'm going to post our NFL and college football picks right here. So this tickers all throughout the report. I'm going to be talking about some of these games, and we've got the NFL and college football. By the way, everything is college football related. Everything I'm going to be talking about right now. So let's get right to it. Okay, so you got the game coming up on Friday night. Florida State and Louisville. Florida State's a 2.5 point favorite. They've lost 4 straight road openers. 0-9 against the spread in the last 9 as favorites of less than 35 points off of a straight-up dog win. So that's the big trend there. But Louisville counters that. 0-7 against the spread. Their last 7 at home off a straight-up dog win. Now, I side towards Florida State in this one based on the fact that we said in the beginning of the season, really think this is going to be a bounce back. We're heading in the right direction of the season for the Seminoles. It's already started that way. Louisville's dangerous. But so far, I think Florida State's better. So I would take Florida State in that one. And it actually is one of our picks on the week. Also later tonight, another pick we're taking, Wyoming at home against Air Force. I like ball. I like Wyoming. Just come on, Josh Allen's from. They have had some really talented players there over the last several years. It's fun watching them. Once the snow hits, it's just an awesome environment. You don't want to be there, but it's great watching on TV. It's awesome. Maybe I do want to be there. But anyway, this is a heated rivalry between these two teams. It's dated back a very long time. Air Force is the better team this year, no question about that. But I like the points. It's 16. What works against me here is the favorite in the series has won and covered the last 3. Like I said, Air Force is the better team. I'm just going to take Wyoming here. Prime time. I think maybe that they can keep this game relatively close to that 16. Okay, now, the rest of the games that we have information on, we're taking Georgia against South Carolina. South Carolina just 4-11 the last 15 as a home dog, 1-8 against the spread their last 9 at home versus teams with a winning percentage of 800 or better. Also, Georgia, the road team in the series, has covered 6 of the last 7. Georgia 15-5 against the spread their last 20 as a road favorite. And I said this a couple of weeks ago, and I'm going to continue talking about this. And this might be the beginning of us taking Georgia every week as long as they cover for us this week. Kirby Smart, 58-29. against the spread. Head coach of the Georgia Bulldogs. Pretty damn impressive. All right, now we're not taking this game. Texas State at Baylor. By the way, we're going to go in the order of the times of the game. So we're starting with the new games. Baylor's a big favorite. I was close to taking Texas State, but I stay away from college football dogs of 20 or more in that area unless I think they have a realistic chance of winning. And I also don't like giving the points that are that high as well. But I was thinking about Texas State. The only reason, I don't think they're going to win the game, of course. But these two programs have met 3 times. The point spread results have been 9 points or less in all 3. And you might be going, yeah, but that must have been years ago. No, last year. Texas State only lost by 9 at home. And that was week 1. And Baylor was a 14-point favorite. So they're 31 this year. That's 17 points more, even though it was a close game. So you see where I'm coming. All right, Cincinnati and Ohio. And this was a game that I came really close to taking. But overall, I was kind of just, the point spread's kind of high. And I don't know what to expect because Miami's going to have a backup quarterback. Or at least that's what it looks like. Because Brett Gabbert injured himself in the Kentucky game. So that's an injury update that we have. I don't believe he's going to play. Avion Smith is the backup. He's a young kid. He's only a redshirt freshman. He did have 3 touchdown passes against Robert Morris. But you're going to now Fickle, and I know major players are gone from Cincinnati's defense, but they still have a ton of talent there. And Fickle, and they're going to play good defense, and they have dominated the Bearcats this series lately. They have, I think, how many of them won? 16 straight? Yeah, 16 straight in series. They've won and covered the last 4 in Miami. Overall versus Miami, I should say, won and covered, and they've won and covered pretty big. So that's why I was kind of getting close to taking Cincinnati in this one. Also, Miami 1-9 against the spread in their last 10 off a straight-up win versus a non-conference opponent. The battle for the victory bell will probably go to Cincinnati in this one. I would have given Miami. I would have taken Miami in this game if Gabbert was playing. But I can't take it with a redshirt freshman quarterback. Matter of fact, I almost flipped to the opposite side. Okay, next up, Western Kentucky and Indiana. Here's a game I almost took for the upset. Instead, I'm going to take the 6 with Western Kentucky. They lost by 2 to Indiana last year at home. Not sure if you remember that game. It was a pretty close game. Indiana was a 9-point favorite in that one. How about this? Helton, the head coach of Western Kentucky, he's been there for several years. And they have 7 outright upset wins under Helton at Western Kentucky. The program had never beaten a Big Ten team. I give them a chance to do it. I said this before on the show. I don't like Indiana this year. Don't like what I've seen so far. They're very lucky to beat Illinois. I think it's going to be a tough one here for them. I think Western Kentucky has a shot to pull off the upset. Also, let's now move on to UCLA and South Alabama. I want to bring up this game because of injury situation. First of all, Zach Charbonneau, the running back for UCLA, did not play last week, so we don't know if he's going to play against South Alabama. 14 points is not a lot of points to be giving up Pac-10 against South Alabama, but remember, South Alabama is now part of a hot, Sun Belt conference, and you know what's been going on there. But South Alabama 1-12 against the spread. Their last 13 off a double-digit against the spread win. Flip side, UCLA 0-8 against the spread. They lost 8 as non-conference favorites of less than 18. I'm staying away from this one just in case. Also, let's now move on to another game that I almost took, and this was Ole Miss and Georgia Tech. 16-point favorite for the Rebels. Only the 4th time that the Rebels are going to be playing a non-conference road game since 2015. 0-3 straight up and against the spread. The other 3. But those were better teams than Georgia Tech. Historically, the Rebels, 4-23 against the spread, their last 27 as a road favorite of 16 or less. But under Lane Kiffin, 4-1 against the spread as a road favorite. So there's that. Georgia Tech, 2-7 straight up, 1-8 against the spread versus non-conference teams under Jeff Collins. I was a Jeff Collins fan, thought it was a really good hire. Said it was going to take a lot of 4 or 5 years to change the program, triple option, and so forth. But from what I hear, Georgia Tech fans are not very happy with Collins. I don't know if it's impatience or not. The quarterback, Sims, I thought he would be progressing a little bit more than he has. But again, he was here for other reasons. It's just tough. I mean, I don't know if they're going to have the patience or not. I think they should, but Georgia Tech fans have followed them a lot more than I have, and they're not very happy right now. Vandy in Northern Illinois. This is the game that we're going with. Vandy has won their last 5 against MAC opponents by 21 points per game. Also, they are 4-0 straight up against Northern Illinois, including a 24-18 win back in 2019. Northern Illinois 0-5 against the spread their last 5 as a home favorite after they allow 35 or more points. 2-7 against the spread their last 9 as a home favorite. And Vandy 5-1 against the spread on the road under head coach Clark Lee. So we're taking Vandy plus the 3 in that one. Let's see what else. We are going to talk Notre Dame football a little bit later on today's on the channel today. So keep an update for that. Tyler Buckner will talk about his injury. Drew Pine will get his start in that one. So he was a former 4-star prospect. So we'll talk Notre Dame football a little bit later on the channel. Cal has covered 9 straight as a non-conference road dog versus Power 5 teams since 2011 and 3. Last 14. ATS is a road dog. Let's see. Also, let's move on now to just a quick one because we like UNLV. We had them as a 5-star last week, as you know, and they covered for us. Marcus Arroyo's done a good job there. We like what the direction they're headed. This is the first time they've been a home favorite since 2018. But we're taking them. We're backing them against North Texas minus the 2. North Texas just 6-11 against the spread. Their last 17 as a road dog. Okay. And by the way, we talked about on the show earlier about BYU's injury situation. So you want to update that for sure because it's only Thursday, whether or not Nakua and Romney are going to play at wide receiver. Chase Roberts, a redshirt freshman, has done a nice job, but top 2 wide receivers not available for Oregon might be too much for BYU, but we're going to back them nonetheless. Georgia Southern UAB, as we mentioned, I think we mentioned on the show earlier, I'm sticking with Clay Helton and Georgia Southern again for another week. I don't like what I've seen so far from the Bill Clark-less UAB team. Georgia Southern has covered 8 straight games as double-digit dogs off a straight-up win, including 1-0 this year. And they're also 7-1 against the spread in their last 8 on the road after they score 35 or more points versus a team that is either 500, playing either 500 ball or worse. Troy and App State. I don't think App State's going to have a hangover. They're a 12-point favorite. It's a Sun Belt game, so it's important to kind of rivalry, even though App State's dominated lately. They are 4-0, straight up. 3-0-1 against the spread. Their last 4 versus the Trojans by a 159-40 margin. And they've covered 5 straight Sun Belt Conference home openers. And I did a little research and found out that when App State had a big upset win over North Carolina back in 2019, very next game, they won and covered against Coastal Carolina. All right. Washington State, they're one of our top 5 stars. Didn't appear that Mark agreed with me. Thinks Washington State's maybe going to have a hangover. He knows best. Maybe he's right. I'm just all for Washington State. Liked them last week. Jake Dickert, the head coach, has done a really amazing job. Defensive side of the ball, that's what's dictating things because the offense has been a little bit sluggish. But Colorado State, I mean, they had 246 total yards against Middle Tennessee, lost by 15 at home. Don't forget, Middle Tennessee lost by like 40 the week before against James Madison. Colorado State, 129 of 131st nationally in total offense, going up against that Washington State defense. So Washington State doesn't even have to score that much to cover the 16 as far as I'm concerned. And Washington State has covered 8 straight as a home favorite of less than 18 when they take on a team coming in following back-to-back straight-up losses. Good game, under-the-radar game. Liberty 2-0, Wake Forest 2-0. Wake Forest has Clemson next week, so maybe a look ahead a little bit. They're 12-8 ATS as a home favorite under Dave Clawson, who's doing a fantastic job. But we're staying away from this one. We had Liberty as a 4-star week 1. They won, didn't cover because of the overtime rule. And then we had them last week as an upset against UAB. But we're staying away from this one because they're definitely moving up in competition. Mark talked about Marshall being a team that you might want to stay away against based on some historical trends. If he's right, another thing to keep an eye on, They are just 1-6 against the spread in their last 7 in a second of back-to-back road games. So I did pick Bowling Green to play the MAC championship game. If that's going to be the case, I do want to see them uh, competitive in this one. Not sure they're going to pull it off as far as the upset, but that'd be nice. Mississippi State at LSU. John Emery is supposed to running back, the number 1 running back. I believe he should be number 1. He did not play the first 2 because of suspension. He's supposedly returning this game, so that'll be a shot in the arm for LSU. They've won 19 of the last 22 against Mississippi State. The road team in the series has won 3 straight. So that favors Mississippi State, but LSU won 2 of those on the road. So that's kind of tricky to kind of, go on that trend if you want to, use that one or not. NC State, that's one of our top picks this week. They're a 10-point favorite. Dave Dorn has done a fantastic job there. He's 22-1 straight up at home versus non-conference teams, but we're given the 10. They've covered 13 out of 19 as a home favorite the last 19, so that helps. They've also covered 8 straight off of a non-conference game when they take on an opponent off back-to-back straight-up wins like Texas Tech. Now, keep in mind, Texas Tech is with their backup quarterback. Shuck was injured week 1, so Donovan Smith took over. Quarterback did a nice job pulling the upset against Iowa State last year, had the game-winning touchdown run last week in overtime against Houston. He's got talent, but he's not the number 1 quarterback. Now you got to go to NC State, level up in competition. Not necessarily conference-wise, but again, NC State's battling for the conference championship. That's not Texas Tech at the Big 12 this year, so that's why I'm giving 10 in that one. I also like Arkansas State at Memphis. This is a really good rivalry, and I'm getting 14, so that's why I'm taking it. The Wolves have covered 9 of the last 14 as a road dog, including 1-0 this year. Memphis is 1-7 against the spread. Their last 8 as a home favorite. Home opener, by the way, for Memphis in this one. They played last year, these 2 teams, 55-50 Memphis. Arkansas State covered. Last 2 years, Memphis has won, but Arkansas State has covered. Keep an eye on Charlotte's quarterback situation because Reynolds has not played the last, 2 weeks, I believe. And they're 0-6-1 against the spread as a road dog. It's 19 points. I was going to take Georgia State. The only reason I stayed away from because I don't know about Reynolds. And if he comes back, that'll be a shot in the arm. I also don't like the fact that Thursday night Georgia State plays Coastal Carolina. I kind of stay away from college teams that have that look-ahead primetime game. Otherwise, I kind of think Georgia State might not be a bad play. They're 6-3 against the spread their last 9 as a home favorite. Nevada, Iowa. We talked about this one. So why would I take them as a 13-1 underdog like I did with Georgia Southern last week? I wouldn't. I think Georgia Southern might actually have been a better play. Even though the numbers are the same. But I'm intrigued by this one because how can it not be? Iowa's just not doing anything offensively, and part of that is because their top 2 wide receivers are out. Both Keegan Johnson and Nico Raggiani, who combined for well, I don't want to talk about stats because even their stats last year weren't all that good as the number 1 and 2 receivers, but they were, and they haven't played the first 2 weeks, and they're not playing supposedly as far as we know. They're not supposed to play again this week. And I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't, because this is not a Big Ten game. Now you look at this, and Brian Ferentz, the coach's son, that is a bad PR thing going on right now at Iowa. Fans do not want him around anymore. The nepotism's not working, so that's something that to keep an eye on. Remember I said I kind of jumped ship with Nebraska last week, and I did it, and I figured, well, I'll capitalize if there's the upset. Doing the same here. Because it's almost like they're one of these losses away from there being some major changes. So I figured, well, maybe I should take advantage of that. That's the reason why I'm going to go all out. And I can. Now I'm in a situation where I've got over 3 in the bank that I could actually, I could roll the dice even a little bit on the money line. And I always take these games anyway. I told you, I was always going to take at least 1 or 2 underdogs of 15 or more in college football every week. And I think this is one that makes sense. Also, the turnover margin teams from last year. Nevada, 1st in the nation in turnover margin. Iowa was 7th in the nation. You know what's going on this year? Iowa, and they have the same head coach and defensive coordinator, Ken Wilson. He was the defensive coordinator last year. He's now the head coach. And you know what their turnover margin is right now nationally? 4th. So they're right back to doing what they did last year as far as turnovers. You know what Iowa is this year? They are 104th. So when Iowa's not getting the turnovers, that is a major issue for, and then you throw in the fact that a couple of their weapons are banged up and out of, and you can kind of see why they're, because they're not an explosive team to begin with. Okay, so even when they're getting the turnovers and they have everybody healthy, they're still not scoring a lot of points. But throw all that other stuff in there, and you can see why there are some issues. But I figure, hey, why not go with the potential upset here in this one? Okay, also, SMU and Maryland. I'm taking Maryland in this one basically because I think they have turned the corner. I think that they are now in a spot. I don't think they're the old Maryland. The old Maryland would have lost a game like this. I think they're going to win a game like this. Rhett Lashley looks like he's doing a good job so far. It helps to have Tanner Mordecai under center. Rashay Rice, boy, he is an exciting receiver you want to keep an eye on. He's having a fantastic start to the season. SMU has won 13 straight non-conference games, including 2 against TCU. But let's keep in mind that's with Sonny Dykes. So we'll see if Lashley can continue doing that. And Maryland just 1-11 against the spread their last 12 home after they score 35 or more. So that says take SMU, doesn't it? Yeah, it kind of does. But like I said, I think this is a different Maryland team than those other teams. I don't know where SMU is without Sonny Dykes yet. This is their big test. So I'm going to ride Maryland. They're at home, Big Ten team. And I like I said, I think they're different. And if they are, they will beat SMU. They got to prove it. Let's see. Moving on. Let's talk about let's see, what else do we have here that really is of interest to you that we haven't talked about yet, so we can kind of move on and get you back to the show. Well, I think maybe let's see. Oh, Eastern Michigan. Let's talk about Eastern Michigan. 21-5-1 against the spread, off a straight up loss under head coach Chris Creighton. That's pretty impressive. 21-5-1 on the road, off a straight up loss under Chris Creighton. They've also covered 14 straight off of a double-digit against the spread loss versus a non-conference team. So that's pretty good. And Eastern Michigan, 3-4 straight up, 5-2 against the spread. Their last 7 games against Pac-12 teams. They're getting, I think they're getting like about 21 now on the road. And I think that should do it. Everything else we've talked about on the show. We're going to let you get back to the show. And in the future, if you don't, because I'm going to be throwing these in every week on our show. If you don't care about what I have to say on these little condensed reports, then you check the bottom of the screen. We're going to put the markers in there, and you can. Oh, there's the point he's done. I'm going to pick up where we left off. That easy. Okay, thanks a lot for checking back in with us on the same show that we're doing anyway. And take a look at those odds. We'll have them up on the ticker once again next week during the show. A little bit different way we did it this week, but we'll obviously continue to do it again on these. I mean, during the show as well every week. So thanks for being patient with us. Let's get back to the show. Let's talk NFL, Mark. And quickly, last week you had the Pittsburgh-Cincinnati overtime thriller. Really strange, though, how it really. I mean, if you throw out everything else, T.J. Watt's performance, the interception, you just throw everything else out. How on earth does Cincinnati screw up 2 easy kicks, considering the guy who was kicking for them, and it wasn't, neither one was his fault, but the guy that's kicking for him is like the superstar kicker of our generation now again. He's going to take over for Tucker for Baltimore before you know it. It's like you would never. Oh, once, okay, twice. I mean, I don't even know if that long snapper's still on the team because I think they should have kicked him out of the locker room.
Well, it was a weekend for hell from the kickers in the National Football League. Let's just admit it. It was a horrible week, except save Cade York from the Cleveland Browns, the rookie, who nailed that 58-yarder to win the football game. In fact, he hit every field goal that he attempted. He's going to end up being a really, really nice draft pick that people criticize Cleveland for making. But nonetheless, Cincinnati, if you look at the stats in the game, you'd insist Cincinnati won the football game by 2 touchdowns. They dominated in the stats. They had a 0-5 turnover margin against them in the football contest here. But some way, somehow, Pittsburgh gutted it out and won the football game, and we're happy, and so are our fans, because that was our big featured NFL game last week.
And as far as Pittsburgh, though, they lose Watt. Jet fan, Pittsburgh's on the schedule in a couple of weeks. Good timing. I've said this before, and I'm going to keep saying it. I know maybe they're not going to do it. You tell me. But I believe that T.J. Watt's value should be every bit as valued with the point spread as going from a backup to a starting quarterback. That's how valuable I think that guy is for that defense.
Well, he's Aaron Donald to that defense, like he is to the Rams. If Aaron Donald's out, there's a big hole in that line. T.J. Watt's out, there's a big deficit to the whole total defense. As good as Myles Garrett is from the Cleveland Browns, it's arguable T.J. Watt is just a little bit better, and they can't afford to lose him. They're going to be without him this week against Pittsburgh, and that could end up being a big detriment for the Steelers this
Against New
week.
England, yeah, and
Against New
that's
England.
actually happens to be one of my picks. Okay, quickly also, the Texans and the Falcons blew late leads, and when you're watching it happen, you just know it, because you got bad teams up against good teams or better teams, and you can see it happening, and you just know this is just not going to work out for these teams. It's unfortunate, and it's sad when it happens. But New Orleans, it's like all of a sudden they go to the hurry up, and they just completely changed offensively. And for Houston, I mean, it looked like Davis Mills was choking a little bit there because he was looking good early. Everything was going good, and then he couldn't hit anything in the fourth quarter when they needed, and they had the turnover that led to it was just two teams that don't win very much, that just and they're young and they just have to find ways to win. And this is unfortunately what happens. At least for Houston's sake, they got a tie.
Well, it's what happens to quarterbacks like Davis Mills. He'll end up being a career backup in the National Football League. He was never all that good when he was drafted. I believe it was third round out of Stanford. But he's serviceable, and he's filling the hole right now for Houston here. But they're not going to win football games because of him, just like the Cleveland Browns are not going to win games because of Jacoby Brissett. They're just serviceable backups. So we'll see what happens here when they take on Denver this
What do you think
Sunday.
about Mariota?
I like him as I think he's a quarterback coach on the field and on the sidelines. Uh, but again, do they win football games because of him? I rather doubt it. And we're not talking about Mariota being a Pro Bowl quarterback or even in whispering about being a top tier NFL starting quarterback.
Speaking of top tier quarterbacks, that's what Trey Lance is supposed to be.
Yes.
And this is the reason. Look, this is what happens when you're trying to win Super Bowls, and yet you also have to try to give this kid. See, I understand that because of contracts and everything, got to get these kids in as soon as possible and so forth and so on. But this just wouldn't have been done 15, 20 years ago. You would have kept Trey Lance on the bench for 2, 3, 4 years if you had to, and played out Jimmy Garoppolo until his contract runs out. And look, it's only another year, I guess, and maybe have restructured it. But this is what's going to happen, and I think they're going to take their lumps. I still believe he's a talented kid. I still believe that he could turn into a good starting quarterback. But you're going to have ups and downs, and this is what you're dealing with.
Let me ask you this question. What happens this week if it's another downer this week from Trey Lance and they start out 0-2? Do they make the switch? Do they make the change? I think absolutely they have to
I
make the
think if it's
change.
a real downer, I think if he like throws 3 picks and it looks like he's in trouble, yeah. I think if they lose a game and it's kind of like last week, I, you know, I think in my opinion, I think you go with him at least another game, because then why did you go with him anyway? If you're gonna give him the quick hook. But again, if he looks really like he's lost and he's in over his head, yeah, you got to take him out.
Well, the biggest proof in the pudding about letting a star first round quarterback marinate is Aaron Rodgers. I mean, when he
There you
was
go.
drafted out of Cal, what was it, 3 years before he became a starter with Green Bay? Maybe even the fourth year. He just sat behind Brett Favre, and look what he's done or what he's become. So I think they're throwing Lance into the fires a little bit too early
Absolutely.
here.
I mean, he was playing FCS football just a couple
Yep.
of years ago. FCS. I don't care what
Yep.
you say about how good that program was. It's still FCS. All right. And then Seattle, who's in first place in the NFC West? Well, it's not San Francisco. It's Seattle. After 1 week, good for Geno Smith. I know how much he was ripped apart in the New York media. And look, he deserved a lot of it because he was very immature when he was with the Jets. It was the worst landing spot for Geno Smith to be a young quarterback in New York. He was never going to work out. But look, he always had the talent. And I think that he's got what it takes to now be given the opportunity this season. Clearly, he's better than Drew Lock at this point, to see what he can do. We'll see. I mean, it's one game, especially in a game that's that big. me, it's the pupil, the student, kind of whatever. So we'll see. But it's interesting when you take a look at this matchup, as you know, that's coming up against San Francisco, as we just talked about Lance, and we could segue that to the matchups just quickly. Seattle has won 4 straight versus San Francisco, including both games last year as dogs, and Seattle is 12-6-1 against the spread their last 19 as a road dog. But the only thing also that we have to keep in mind is a lot of this stuff had to do with Russell Wilson. So I don't know what we do with that. You tell me.
Well, what I see is a San Francisco football team that's really struggled in the role that they're being cast into this particular week. That's basically home favorites. They've just gagged repeatedly doing just that. 0-9-1 to the spread the last 10 times they've been a division home favorite. My goodness. 1-10 to the spread is a favorite of 7 or more points. You're asking them to all of a sudden play a good game after playing a bad football game last week. I know there's letdown in here for Seattle, but it's still a division football game. There's not going to be that much of a drop off here. I think this is a little bit overpriced here for San Francisco, and I'll play Seattle plus the
Yeah, I
points.
tell you, what I would probably do is if someone said, "Hey, you have to wager on this game," I'd probably take a few bucks on the money line. That's what I would do. Not to say that I'm doing it because I'm not this week, but that's how I would do it. Are you forcing me to put money on it? All right, I'll just go all in and see if I could capitalize on it because they're over 3-1 on the money line, which I think was a little bit high. But again, we don't know. It's so early, and I know you guys were talking about it with Victor yesterday. It's available, of course, on your channel at Playbook Experts, the YouTube channel. About you just can't get too crazy, and I think even Jim Feist talked about it on his report that's available on the channel. You just can't get too crazy about what happens in week 1 in the NFL.
It's a huge, huge mistake. Overreaction to week one in any sport, but especially the National Football League, because the betting public remembers what they saw last, and they're going to continue to look for that repeat performance to happen. Ends up being a big, big mistake. So don't overreact to what happened in week one in the National Football
And
League.
we said it last week, and we're just going to give kudos to JH Sportsline. That's his moniker. Again, on your channel, and he talked about the play for week 1 was to take the teams that missed the playoffs versus teams that made the playoffs, especially if that team is a dog. And we referenced the 3 games: Detroit, Chicago, Miami, and they all won. I mean, they all covered, and 2 of them won. So
That's a pretty nice call. Jeff Hockman's a really, really solid handicapper. A great horse lover too, by the way, Greg.
yes,
You and I, him and John Arden, we all have that in common as well. But Jeff does know how to handicap football games, and he does really, really well. You want to check him out, playbookexperts.com, and check out his daily free pick videos.
key injuries to keep an eye on. Now, looks like Jamal Adams. I haven't heard anything yet, but it sounded like he was going to be lost for the season. That's how bad it sounded.
Yeah, that's a big, big blow for Seattle, their defense here, because the defense is what really kept that football team glued in the game. And if they lose him, someone like him, it could be devastating. It could also open up the airwaves for Trey Lance in a sense like that. But it remains to be seen whether or not there will be a letdown by Seattle and a bounce back by San Francisco. That's the only way the 49ers cash this ticket is if those two things
And
happen.
I know it's not a game I'm taking, but Dak Prescott's out. We don't know how long, and Cincinnati comes into town. And after what happened last week, losing that game, they don't want to go 0-2. But then we've got that whole backup quarterback deal. First start, backup quarterback. And look what same thing happened last year. One start, backup quarterback. Cooper Rush comes in, has a monster game. I think it was Minnesota, wasn't it? A primetime game against the Vikings, I believe.
It was a primetime game. I'm not sure Minnesota, but I think you're correct on that. But Cooper Rush did have that rally around the quarterback performance in that
Yeah,
football
and
game.
you don't
Yes.
actually have official stats for any of that stuff, do you? Those backups. And by the way, it was
No,
in
I don't.
Minnesota.
No, I
Yeah,
don't know.
but we should. But that was, that's something that's why it scared me because the line's down to 7 now. Otherwise, I would take the Bengals. So, um, and then Keenan Allen looks like he's not going to play tonight in the game. I don't think that's a big deal for a week. They've got a little bit depth at wide receiver, and Herbert's an excellent quarterback. We can start with that game, and this is actually going to be one of my upset plays. I like the Chargers either way, especially if I can get the 4 points. So I'll probably, either way, I'm fine with. The Chargers are 6-3 against the spread, last 9 as a road dog. 16-4-2 against the spread. Their last 22 as a road dog in division games. And the
Wow.
road team has won the last 4 in the series outright. So I'm taking the Chargers tonight.
Well, you've got Justin Herbert will not be intimidated in here. He's won and covered both of his starts at Arrowhead Stadium in his brief tenure here with the Chargers here. And you've got Patrick Mahomes. Did he throw a no-hitter the last game
Yeah.
in baseball analogy? Probably
Yeah.
so. I think this is going to be a right down to who scores last type
Yeah, that's
football
what
game.
put it over the top. I was going to take the points, but then when I saw road team won 4 straight outright, I said, I'll just go and put it all on the Chargers to win the game. Also, Arizona, speaking of Arizona and Las Vegas, maybe we shouldn't be speaking about Arizona, but I'm going to go with them for 1 week, and that's because this is the best spot for this quarterback coach kind of thing. If you take a look at it, Cliff Kingsbury has never lost a spread as a dog versus losing teams. 8-0 against the spread versus losing teams. And the Cardinals under Cliff Kingsbury are 13-5-1 against the spread as a road dog. Throw on the fact that Vegas has dropped 7 straight covers off a straight up division road loss. And I'm taking Arizona plus the 6.
I like that Kingsbury stat you just reeled out of the Playbook Football Preview Guide magazine. That's a beauty here. That's a nice call. Good homework. I also happen to like Arizona in the football game here just as well. I think there's a little bit of a minor letdown here for the Raiders after that big get up game in the first game in which they didn't get the job done. And Arizona was red faced and embarrassed. They come in here with the egg on their face from that humiliating blowout loss. I think this will be a much, much tighter football game.
Tampa Bay, New Orleans. And I almost decided I was almost going to go with Tampa Bay, but then I was like, you know what? I'm sticking again. This is something we always talk about. If you're going to stick with specific handicappers, or if you're going to stick with a specific trend system, whatever you want to call it, you got to do it all the way pretty much. You can't just nitpick, pick this, that. You do that, you might wind up picking the losses. You can't do, you got to go all in on them. And there were some really good trends this week that I went all in on because I liked them as well. And this was one that went against Tampa Bay, which is the reason why I say, I'm not gonna pick them out. So let me just stay away from the game. But the reason I said that is because if you look at it, and you guys talked about this on your show yesterday, in this series, it's very strange, but New Orleans has just not lost to Tampa Bay in the regular season 7 straight games. The only game they've lost in the last 3.5 years or so was the playoff game, the one that really mattered. But that says something, especially the last couple of years with Tom Brady. And that's why, look, Tampa Bay still has issues in the offensive line. I think you saw that last week against Dallas. And Tom Brady's not a young kid. So it's just Dallas's offense was completely ineffective. So I don't know, maybe New Orleans offense, maybe they pick up where they left off. This could be, again, I don't like the totals, but I'm expecting this game to be a defensive kind of battle. But yeah, that kind of streak kind of scared me away from taking the Bucks.
Well, Jameis Winston had one of the best games of any quarterback in the National Football League last week. It sort of stays under the radar.
You mean best quarter?
Quarter. Okay, we'll lump it in the second half, the best quarter. Okay, and he rallied them to victory and did a terrific job doing just that. So give him his due, his kudos for what he did, and I think he's going to end up being, well, he's going to work out real well for the Saints this football season here. The Saints have always been a real live conference home dog, especially against quality opposition. 9-0 to the spread against an 800 or better opponent, as obviously Tampa Bay is coming in here. But I do think there's pressure on Tom Brady. You're going to ask him to win back-to-back road games. And just like there are horses or courses for horses, there are football teams that just have another team's number. And New Orleans has Tampa Bay's number. It's in their head. It's psychological. And I think it works here again on Sunday.
And by the way, the line's only 2.5. But if it goes to 3, the Saints have covered 12 straight as division dogs of 3 or more. So keep that in mind. I think it's interesting. You got Bowles and Dennis Allen. You got the 2 new assistants that have been very good assistants, but failed in their one opportunity as head coaches. They get the opportunity again. They both won their openers last week. So we'll see what happens this week. Tennessee and Buffalo. This is going to be my second and only upset, but my real upset. And the reason I'm doing this is I'm going to give Tennessee a shot. And that's I picked them to be a pretty good team this year. I still believe in them. Their defense played really well last week. Basically, it was a couple plays. That's what happened. And Tennessee did their usual home favorite. They just I don't know. I probably should have realized and not even taken them because they're just not good in that spot. But defensively, they did a really good job for most of the game against the Giants. And now this is a position that they're much better in. The dog in this series with Buffalo, and they've played 4 straight years, has won all 4. So I'm going to go ahead and ride Tennessee. It's a big game for them. They don't want to go 0-2 to start the season. And Mike Vrabel is 9-1 against the spread off a non-division versus an opponent off a double-digit straight-up win. And I also did a little bit of my own homework and realized that when Sean McDermott is in home openers, if you take the Jets out of the equation, and they're not a very good team, they're just 1-2 straight up, 0-3 against the spread in home openers. So
That's hard for you to have to say to take the Jets out of the
yeah,
equation.
exactly.
But
But I'm
it
a
applies.
realist. So
Yes. This goes back to what we talked about earlier on in the show, overreaction to week 1. And this will be the biggest overreaction game this particular week. Buffalo destroyed the Rams on Thursday night. The whole world got to watch that. Tennessee lost straight up last week to the New York Giants. My goodness, who's going to want a piece of Tennessee in this football game? I
yeah,
will. Okay.
yeah.
I'm going to play them plus the points.
Okay, and then the last one is Minnesota Philly, and boy, you talk about I don't. It's been a long time that I have found more trends that are just on one team and against another team, maybe ever. This is just, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do in this game. I was leaning towards the Eagles when I first saw it, and then I saw all these numbers working for me. I was like, oh, I got to take Philly. So here we go. Nick Sirianni, 2-0-1 against the spread as a home favorite. That was all last year, of course, year 1. Nick Sirianni, 4-0 against the spread as a favorite versus non-division teams. Philadelphia has covered 8 straight as a non-division favorite of less than 7 after they score 35 or more points. Minnesota, 0-7 against the spread their last 7 as Monday Night Football dogs. Minnesota, 0-7 against the spread their last 7 as non-division dogs after they allow 10 or less points. Minnesota, 0-6 against the spread their last 6 off a double-digit straight-up win versus an opponent with a 666 or greater conference winning percentage. And finally, Minnesota, 2-12 against the spread in their last 14 as road dogs of less than 7 off a double-digit straight-up win. And yes, I got all of that right here. And you've seen this before, right? This book.
I Yes, I do recall that. Yes.
And I just kept going, looking over it. I couldn't stop. I was like, oh my goodness, all this stuff that was all for one team and against another. So that obviously put a little bit of a couple of additional check marks in the game for me.
Well, you got the Twins coming in here off the home win onto the road, where if you take a look at them, Monday night road games, they've really struggled. They're just 3-9 to the number. The Eagles have owned the NFC North when coming off a win and cover 7-2. A litany of trends here to Philadelphia in the football game. I'm not going to step in front of it. I'm with you. I'm on the Eagles in this game.
And they're playing the Vikings, not the Twins. So just keep that in mind.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Who just did a little baseball handicapping before the show?
All right, Mark. So, hey, we referenced it a few times. You got the channel going on. I've already noticed the subscribers are starting to pick up, so that's nice. The viewership is picking up, which is nice. It's not easy, a new channel and all that on YouTube, but Playbook Experts, so starting to kind of pick up a little bit of momentum early.
Yeah, check it out at youtube.com, Playbook Experts. Subscribe to the channel, and we'll send you notices whenever any one of the Playbook Experts does share a free pick video. A lot of really great information. Greg and I shared it here. Victor and I do our weekly podcast. It used to be an audio show only. Now it's a video show. You can watch and listen to the podcast. Check it out all online on the YouTube channel at Playbook Experts, or simply go to this address, pb.buzz, B-U-Z-Z, /video to find out all the videos we've got on tap each and every day.
Mark, appreciate it. I'm going to close the show off for a minute or two with the rest of the audience. So I know you're busy. I'll let you go, and I look forward to talking to you again next week.
Hey, my pleasure as always, Greg. Be well, stay safe, and let those dogs bark once again this week.
I hope so. That's for sure. All right. So hopefully you can take a look. Everybody else that's checking out the screen there, we have the ticker. And I was showing the ticker throughout the show. And I'm not going to put this on every week. But basically, we have the picks formula that I have as far as for my, let me just get rid of Mark there, for my picks. And again, keeping in mind, I am not an expert handicapper. So you want to get top notch handicapping information, that's why I'm plugging Mark's magazine and his YouTube channel. Those are the guys that really are the experts. So I was laying that out there for the whole show for a reason, and again, not going to do it every week, just going to do it so you know exactly the system that I put together for myself. And I do think it's important to have your own system. And that's that to me is probably the best thing that I can convey to you guys out there that are either expert. Well, you don't have to be experts, but you could just be people who like to wager on football games or any sport on a consistent basis. You like to do it for fun, whatever. Fact is, I think it's important to have your own system, and it took me years, so I came up with my system that worked for me. So the reason is, and you might have seen it with the fact that the NFL, I had less points than college football. And the reason being, and right now, like for instance, I'm showing you the NFL picks. I'm going to remove that and put our college football picks. The reason being is because I prefer college football. And a lot of the reason I prefer college football is because of the upsets, just like we saw last week. That's why I kind of like wagering on golf and NASCAR, because you're dealing with money lines. And that's what I like because I'm not an expert handicapper. So for me, easiest way and the best way for me to make money are with money lines. And I even enjoy doing futures. Not a lot when there's, I'll do a Super Bowl future. I'll do a few of those, but I'm not look at that as like my main source of gambling income. But it's fun, throw a few futures in there. But 4 months of waiting, I mean, you might as well throw a few bucks on, a horse race that'll last 2 minutes. But the point is that college football works for me. So because college football works for me, I'll invest more money in college football. For whatever reason, the NFL, I know a lot of people, hey, it's really hard to handicap college football because there's so much uncertainty and the kids and all this stuff. It's just easier for me. And I think, why? Maybe it's because I love college football. It's my favorite sport. And it's my favorite sport. Really, I should preface this by saying it's my favorite sport until we get to postseason. Once the regular season's over in college football, I'm to the NFL because they have a real playoff system. Maybe we'll change that in a few years when we have a college football playoff system. But I hate the way they put the bowls together, and of course their gimmicky 14 playoff thing. But the fact is I enjoy it more, and because I enjoy it more, I invest more time in it. And also because there are more teams, I believe that there's more of a chance to find games that catch my eye that might be a little bit more like, hey, because again, what are we trying to do here? We're trying to beat the number. We're trying to beat Vegas. We're trying to, hey, you know what? You may think that line is legit. And you know what? A lot of times those lines are legit. It's not about me being smarter or you being smarter than the guy who puts the line out. That's not what it's about. It's just about beating the line. So we're not beating Vegas. We're beating the line, because I could actually predict, because every time I go over the games each week in the NFL and college football, before I look at the line, I always try to predict what the line is. I think that's very valuable because you don't get an impression instantaneously that might be, might cloud your overall judgment. So because of that, if I have a line and if I look at it, oh, you know what? I think the line should be 21. And let's say and I don't remember what the Kansas State, because that was my top pick this week. So I'm not saying that it was, but I might have thought something like, all right, maybe I think they should be favored by 20, 21, or 23, whatever. They're only favored by 14. Okay, well, that's a big gap. Let's say maybe that's one of the biggest gaps on the card. Well, that elevates them to a top play. That's the way I like to do it. That's kind of some of the things that makes it work for me. So anyway, I just wanted to put it out there just so you know exactly, because this way, if something happens all season long, if you are following us and we say reference something regarding, because oh, how much money are we making on our picks this week or this year? How are the upsets doing overall, total wise? Not just how many wins, but what's the number? Are we up? Are we down? This makes it a little bit easier for you. So when you're taking a look at the college football or NFL picks along the screen each week, it makes it easier for you to go, okay, now I kind of can see what he's doing, or hey, there's his four upset plays. So now I'm going to know exactly what to with either whether or not I'm going to agree with him or not. But the fact is, you might even say to yourself, okay, you know what? Let's see what the total was like last week. I mean, that was amazing to go over the total when we had Georgia Southern as a 13-1 dog. Maryland was, I think, 9-1. And then we had a 3-1. No, yeah, what was the other one? I think 3-1, something like that. So I had never had a Saturday like that ever. And my total went from -20 the first, I think it was -20 week one. We went from -20 to over 3,000, like 3,100. What did we have? I think it was total right now is $3,310. I mean, that is so much right now already in the bank that I would have to be really bad to break to lose money this year. Really bad. So I need to take advantage of that, and hopefully this is the beginning of a great season. But that's why I wanted to do that. We're not going to put that up there probably anymore this year because I'll be able to say, hey, we have it already referenced up there from week 2, week 3, whatever this is. Maybe we'll put it in there a few other times, but I just wanted to, again, like I said, you're not listening to this show, this specific show as much as you should be with Mark, because as I said, a lot of as I referenced before, a lot of the information I'm getting here. Okay. Now I'll look at the first step is I'm going to try to guess the lines. Then okay, who do I like? Now I've got my list of games that I like. And then I go here and I use this to maybe say, oh, you know what? I don't like the trends I'm working against. Like, let's say I liked Minnesota, and then I looked at all those trends. Well, I'm putting an X mark on Minnesota. I'm not taking Minnesota this week. I'm not going to flip to Philly, but I'm going to exit off. And then obviously what we want is if I like Philly, like I said, now I've got all those trends that work in my way like crazy. Now all of a sudden, yes, that's one of my top picks. So that's the way that it is. You don't need me to tell you what kind of a legend Marc Lawrence is in the industry. I'm so proud to be able to work with Mark each and every week on this show, on this channel, working with him, producing, and doing a lot behind the scenes on his channel at Playbook Experts. But they're the top dogs over there. And I'm really hoping and looking forward to seeing the growth over at that channel that just started just a few weeks ago. So that's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to be back every Thursday with Mark. That's going to be our schedule. So we should be posting these shows every Thursday, probably early afternoon if all goes well. Just wanted to let you know that that's pretty much how we're going to schedule things. Again, later on today, if you're still watching this show, we have our Notre Dame guests. So we're going to talk some Notre Dame football, talk a little bit about what's going on there, 0-2, quarterback change and such. Also, we have a horse racing show later on with John Hardoon. So we have some races from Churchill, I believe, and Aqueduct that we're looking over. We haven't made our decision yet of what we're going to do there. And taking a look at the schedule, the only other show we have is our fantasy football show that is coming up in a little bit as well. That's going to start our weekly show with our partners over at Draft Sharks. So Jared Smola, I don't know if you've been watching any of our golf shows from earlier this year, but Jared is going to be on with me every other week. Matt Schaff is going to be on with me the other weeks that Jared's not on, and we're going to talk, obviously, fantasy football. Since it's after the waivers, it's because it's a Thursday show each week. We'll have a lot of other things to talk about. So it's not just going to be who you should pick up this week, or it should be a general kind of season kind of show. that will encompass, hey, this is what you should be zeroing in on long term, except instead of just, hey, who to pick up this week and all that other stuff. So that's on our fantasy football show a little bit later on. And as I also said before, and I will reference it every week, I am going to come on and I'm going to give my 2 cents on all the other activity, mostly in college football. It won't be I don't believe we're going to do any of it in the NFL, but mostly in college football. There's just pages of notes that I have here, and I 50 more than 50% of it we haven't talked about on the show. So I'm gonna talk fast, and I'm gonna go through everything on all the games, including injuries, other trends to keep an eye on, things of that nature. And if a pick happens to be one of the games that I have, that as well, but we'll insert that report into the weekly show that we're doing here with Mark every week. Where I insert it, I'm sure you'll figure it out. And if you don't like it and you don't care about that, all you want to do is watch Mark. Then we'll have that you'll have that ability to just take a look at the bottom of the screen. We'll have markers set up so you can see exactly what we're talking about, and you'll know when my report comes on. You go, oh, that's a 5-minute report. I'm going to fast forward that, and we'll pick things up where you guys left off before I decided to intervene. So I hope you understand all that. We're out of here. Thanks for tuning in once again. Thanks to Marc Lawrence, as usual, and we'll see you next time. Good luck, everybody.